Okay, at number 10, we have pain resistance. Moon Knight, or Mark Spector, has been through a lot over the years, and it's fair to say that he may be the living reminder that what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And I know what you're thinking off the top. That isn't really a power. Well, a lot of Moon Knight's powers are like this, since Khonshu comes in and out of the stories as a powerful muse for Mark Spector. Some say this is because he was Marvel's response to Batman's success, basically Marvel's Batman, and we all know that Batman is sort of the same way. A guy who doesn't really have any special powers other than what his mortal identity brings to the table. One good example of Moon Knight's pain resistance is in the first run for the character when he crawls through Bora's icy wind, despite the extreme pain, something that even Professor X confirms is causing him so much agony that he can't even fathom this ability. It could be argued that his tolerance to pain could be due to him having died and come back to life, giving him a tougher disposition by way of Khonshu's blessing. Or he's just a badass like that. Okay, at number 9, we've got weapon mastery. If you follow Moon Knight's story in the comics, you'll know that his work in the CIA has him training with all sorts of weaponry like batons, brass knuckles, chains, shurikens, as well as guns like pistols, sniper rifles, submachine guns, and grenade launchers, among many others. His background in the CIA and Marines have arguably a more substantial effect on his power set than the event with Khonshu's ghost, which is a pretty cool way for a character to find their power set, if you ask me. At number 8, we have Moon Knight's super speed. This is a power that often isn't cited as one of the character's main abilities, but it is something he flaunts again and again. In a few instances, he actually dodges bullets, one time from a number of different automatic turrets firing at him all at once. This is a pretty crazy display of not only speed, but dexterity, being able to move his body like this and doing it while he's flying through the air. In another instance, he actually dodges fire from a lightning spear while he's crammed into a tiny aircraft. And another time when he actually catches a dart fired from a crossbow with ease. This ability comes in hugely handy for this guy because I'm not sure that his speed even relies on the power of the moon. He's just like this.
Number 7, super ventriloquism. Another power that hasn't been seen post-crisis. Superman used to have the ability to throw his voice and talk without moving his lips. While this is impressive, what makes this power really super is that it comes with the ability to perfectly imitate anyone's voice. This ability was used pretty consistently over the years to trick criminals into acting against their own self-interest, such as in the power's first appearance in Superman number 13, when Clark and Lois were being held hostage by armed gunmen. Superman used his ventriloquism to throw his voice so that Lois and the thugs would look behind them, giving him enough time to change into his super suit, run out the door, fly around the block, come in through the window, punch out the goons, and change back into Clark Kent before Lois could turn back around. Personally, I think that if he has the speed to do all that, he could have eliminated a couple of steps from that plan, but what do I know? Superman used this ability several more times to battle evil and to gaslight Lois Lane into thinking that Krypto the Super Pup could talk. This power would be useful in a modern context, as the ability to mimic any voice could be used to open, say, voice control locks. But being Superman, he could always just rip open any door. Number 6. Super reading. This is an ability that Superman still uses from time to time, but it isn't talked about very often. Superman has the ability to read at super speed and retain all of the information. Now, for the average person, this would be great when cramming for an exam, but the Man of Steel often uses it for more practical purposes. For example, in Superman Red Son, the Russian Superman uses his super reading in order to learn new languages in a matter of moments so that he can negotiate with his enemies in their native languages. In a more extreme example found in Action Comics Volume 2, number 12, when Lois Lane is gravely injured and Superman uses his super reading to read every medical textbook ever written in order to quickly learn how to perform life-saving surgery on Lois. This power is essentially a way to learn any skill you need in a matter of moments, so it's surprising that Superman isn't shown using it more often. But I suppose there aren't many practical skills you need when you can crush coal into diamond with your bare hands. Number 5. Time travel. In the 1978 1998 Superman film, the Man of Steel spun the world backwards in order to turn back time and reverse the death of Lois Lane. This is the most infamous example of this, but you may be surprised to learn that this was not a power made up for the movies, and actually has precedent in the comics. Now, it's not that surprising that this ability would be useful, but what is surprising is what Clark chooses to use it for. In Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, number 20, Superman, having grown tired of Lois constantly snooping around, trying to prove that Clark Kent is the Man of Steel, decides to travel back in time to before he started working at the Daily Planet. Once back in time, he decides to instead get a job as a radio DJ, playing top 40 hits for the people of Metropolis, eventually striking up a relationship with his secretary, Liza Landis. In an ironic twist of fate, this time travel ends up making his life more difficult, as Lois still ends up meeting and becoming obsessed with Superman. Dealing with this and Liza Landis, who is also trying to prove that Clark Kent is Superman, makes Superman choose to return to his original future timeline because dealing with one double L initialed woman is easier than two. Superman is unsure if he made the right decision until Liza comes into the Daily Planet for an interview and Clark discovers that she has gained weight, leading him to think to himself, "Great Scott, that was Liza Landis, grown enormously fat through the years. Thank goodness I never married her. Whew." Yeah, real classy, Clark. Number 4, hypnosis. One of the first questions people ask about Superman when they think they're being smart and original is, "Oh, how does no one realize that Superman is Clark Kent when all he does is disguise himself with a pair of glasses?" When asked this, I usually respond that actually he's not just wearing glasses, he's completely changing his personality and body language. And secondly, barely anyone assumes that Superman has a secret identity. They think he's just always Superman. If that doesn't end the conversation, I usually sigh and bring up the Silver Age explanation. You see, back in the day, Superman had the ability to hypnotize people with his mind, and his glasses, whose lenses were made from the window of the starship he came to Earth in, amplified this ability, hypnotizing everyone into seeing Clark as a different person than Superman. Of course, this doesn't explain why pictures of him don't give him away. Beyond protecting his identity, Superman was also able to use his hypnosis abilities offensively, such as in Action Comics number 555, when the Parasite stole his powers and Superman used his hypnotic lenses to make the villain give them back.
At number 3 is Moon Knight's telepathic resistance. This is a great ability, and it's actually attributed to the character's struggle with mental illness, and more specifically his multiple personality disorder. This is clear in West Coast Avengers Volume 2, issues 30 and 36, when Moon Knight is working with the Avengers and notices that he's the only one whose mind hasn't been taken control of. He attributes it to the fact that he's grown strong over the years dealing with his own struggles with mental intrusions from the moon god Khonshu. He even notices that Vision's mind has been taken over, and for an android to have his mind taken over, it just proves how strong Moon Knight's mind defense has become. Mind defense. Is that a good way of putting it? Anyway, you know what I mean. But considering he's got a number of other voices always speaking to him from within, he seems to have enough going on up there that his true mind, his reasonable mind, stays intact when mind control is tried on him. Alright, at number 2 is Moon Knight's formidable martial arts skills. I never use the word formidable, but I'm gonna use it now because the range of his fighting ability is just formidable. And I know we all know that Moon Knight can fight, that's obvious. But many people don't realize that it's one of his most notable and important powers, because sometimes he can't rely on the power of the moon or Khonshu's influence to get the job done, and he needs to go back to his roots as a trained CIA fighter. Did you know that Mark Spector, without even being under the influence of Khonshu, knows Muay Thai, Kung Fu, Eskrima, Krav Maga, Dambe, Savate, boxing, Silat, Filipino martial arts, Judo, Karate, and Ninjutsu. But what's most impressive is how he employs these techniques throughout his different runs in the comics. His training in martial arts is even arguably all that keeps him alive in tough times, like when he's badly injured in the pre-Vengeance storyline, rendering him weaker and slower than ever before. Probably the best place to look for his wide array of fighting abilities will be in the current run. first published in 2021 and being released as we speak. In this modern publication, Moon Knight is back to being brutal, and when not pulling his punches when facing off against his enemies. Moon Knight is back to being brutal and really not pulling his punches when facing off against his enemies. Okay, at number 1 is power absorption. This ability allows him to steal powers from other extremely powerful superheroes in a few different instances. In Avengers number 33, Moon Knight is on a tear, taking on a number of Avengers with an army of undead on his back. He starts off by taking the immortal Iron Fist's powers and encapsulating them in an ankh that he wears around his neck. Then he travels to the Sanctum Sanctorum to steal Doctor Strange's powers, also storing it in the ankh necklace. He tries this again with the Black Panther, but is unsuccessful. Not beaten, just unsuccessful in taking his powers away. So then he runs into Thor on the moon, which we mentioned earlier, and not a great place to run into the agent of Khonshu. Basically, he steals Mjolnir from Thor, which shows that this guy can basically render the Avengers useless, at least as long as they're apart. It's a pretty crazy feat for Moon Knight and shows off a power that some may not know he possesses. At number 10, we have Hit Girl from the Image Comics series Kick-Ass. Although she's basically a child, Hit Girl is already an extremely impressive fighter, having been trained in martial arts since she was basically an infant. Adept in weapons training with guns, hand-to-hand combat, and tactical strategy, Hit Girl doesn't stop at anything to take her enemies out of the equation. And considering she has almost no problem taking down full-size adults as an actual child, there is no question in my mind that she needs to be on this list. The only reason why she isn't at a higher tier is that, well, we all know that there are just plenty of other hard hitters in the running. Okay, coming in at number 9, we've got Black Widow. Black Widow is one of the most impressive superheroes that gets all of her power from martial arts and weapons training alone. Sometimes being accused of being too OP in the MCU for her power set, this highly trained assassin trains hard for her impressive fighting abilities. She has a long history, beginning in the 60s, and has shown that some people are just more skilled than others at holding on to their martial arts training. Black Widow is even credited with having taken down the likes of Spider-Man in the past, which says a lot, and she's even somehow contended with Iron Man in one instance, which is only one of many examples of why she deserved a spot on this list. At number 8 is the Punisher. One word: guns. The Punisher has gotten so good with guns that he doesn't need much more than a couple of pistols and a stone cold heart to take control over his enemies. To be fair, Frank Castle doesn't really deal with enemies much beyond the world of street crime and the human world, but he's still had his fair share of run-ins with superheroes and held his own. In fact, he's credited with taking down Batman himself and even Wolverine at one point. Although to be fair, Wolverine is in pretty dire straits at the time and Frank has access to a steamroller. But still, the Punisher is very seldom at the mercy of anyone, and it's pretty impressive that he's just a human who uses nothing but weaponry and cold hard confidence to get things done. At number 7, we've got Immortality. This is one that many people wouldn't necessarily attribute to Moon Knight because Mark himself has actually died a handful of times. But it seems as though every time this happens, Khonshu is able to revive him without issue. The best demonstration of his tendency to be brought back from the dead is near the end of Moon Knight Volume 3 when he dies. Twice. The first time it seems that he's stabbed and takes a huge fall, but then he's brought back from the depths of the ocean. And the second time he dies right at the end of the storyline, but in the following run comes back again, emerging, or rather exploding, out of Khonshu's tomb. So he's not immortal per se, but he doesn't seem to be capable of being dead for very long before his ancient muse is able to give him another go at life. At number 6 is what's known as Lunakinesis. This entry and most of what's coming up for the rest of the list is during a time when Mark is influenced by Khonshu's powers. So he gets some pretty huge power boosts. Lunakinesis is basically the ability to control the different moons in the universe, as well as any objects made out of the moon's materials. This is what actually allows him to take control of Mjolnir in Avengers number 33, which we'll explore more later on in the list. This power is super useful considering for this time he is able to call upon the energy of the moon to imbue him with a plethora of extremely useful abilities. Another power that goes along with this is known as geokinesis, which is pretty much the ability to manipulate any minerals, rock, and dead terra firma that would make up the structure of a moon. or anything considered to be a moon in the universe. So if your planet's moon is made up of mostly titanium, for example, he's going to be able to manipulate titanium by sheer will. Pretty nuts. All right, at number 5, we've got the time that Mark Spector is empowered by Phoenix Force while he's facing off against the Avengers and his former master Khonshu. We all know that the Phoenix Force is one of the most powerful deities in the universe, and it has been used most notably to possess living beings as hosts. But considering how powerful Mark gets when he's taken over by Khonshu, one can only imagine how much of a boost he gets when Phoenix Force is brought into the mix. Actually, one doesn't have to imagine, because in Avengers number 37, we witness Moon Knight taking on Phoenix Force and harnessing the most power he's ever had in his life. He gets so powerful at this point that he just sort of dismisses Khonshu, showing that he doesn't need the Moon God anymore due to his immense power from Phoenix Force, and a few of the Avengers as well. But that's coming up at the top of our list, so stay tuned. At number 4, we've got Moon Knight's ability for self-sustenance. Maybe this is one that you already know, but it's another power that often isn't associated with Moon Knight's typical power set. While he's imbued with Khonshu's power, Mark Spector is actually able to live in any atmosphere without needing oxygen. This allows him to travel into the cosmos without the need for a breathing mask or a ship with a pressurized cabin. He makes use of this power when he travels to the moon to encounter Thor in a pivotal moment in Moon Knight's trajectory as a character. It's an ability that is widely underrated for this character, but allows him to reach his full potential when he faces off against the Avengers, mentioned previously on this list. At number 3, we have the one and only Captain America. Okay, don't kill me. You may disagree with me on this one, and I'm open to a discussion in the comments, but it's simply the truth that Captain America, and Bucky Barnes for that matter, doesn't actually have superpowers. When they are tested on and given their powers by the super soldier serum, they are only given increases in strength, durability, and fighting skill at the peak of human ability, meaning they are still entirely human and are not actually known to be superhuman, just extremely efficient humans. And as insanely powerful and awesome as these heroes are, don't want to bash them in any way, I just don't think that being extremely efficient humans constitutes having superpowers. Now, I know that some powers are acquired through circumstance, like by falling into a barrel of toxic waste or being, I don't know, bitten by a radioactive spider, but the super soldier serum just simply doesn't give Steve Rogers superhuman powers, just peak human performance. And honestly, I'm not complaining. That's enough for me. At number 2, we have Batman. Bruce Wayne is the perfect example to demonstrate that a good person who is very motivated, dedicated, and, oh yeah, has billions of dollars at their disposal can basically make someone superpowered. I mean, do I even have to convince you that Batman deserves one of the top spots on a list about non-superpowered heroes? Other than being a master detective and tactical genius, Bruce Wayne has trained hard enough to be considered one of the most skilled and agile fighters in the DC universe as well. Matching this up with his unprecedented arsenal of gadgets, vehicles, and weaponry, Batman becomes unstoppable. And it's sometimes easy to forget that under the mask is someone just like us who simply took advantage of his privilege in a way that almost no other superhero has ever done. Almost. Which brings us to number 1, with the one and only Iron Man. Iron Man has got to be one of the coolest superheroes out there, and he doesn't have any powers. I know you know this, I'm just saying it, reminding myself and everyone out there. Taking the concept of a medieval suit of armor and modernizing it to the point that Tony Stark does is one of the coolest and most effective ways I've ever seen a hero go from mortal to superpowered being ever. With only a genius mind and, yeah, a couple million, billion, trillion bucks, I don't know how he affords all that stuff, Iron Man has no issue keeping up with nearly any superhero. And that includes beings from other dimensions with powers incomprehensible to even the most superpowered beings out there. With his genius AI system, extremely durable metals, and adeptly engineered mechanics, the Iron Man armor is born. And it's such an impressive feat that even those with little to no training in hand-to-hand or weapons combat can be put into one of these suits and keep up with the likes of the Avengers, i.e. Pepper Potts in the MCU, which I don't know if that was very believable, but that maybe the suit is just that crazy. There's just no question that Iron Man would be at number 1 on this list, and as one of my top 3 superheroes of all time, it's just that much cooler to me that he's just a person. Tony Stark didn't wait on a barrel of toxic waste or a radioactive spider to come come his way, he took on the challenge of turning himself into a superhero, and he succeeded on a cosmic level.
Number 10. Super mathematics. I'm not entirely sure how super mathematics works or what makes it different than regular math, but the ability to do complex equations on the fly could be useful for someone like Superman, and could explain how he's able to adjust his speed to match the velocity of a falling person and catch them without seriously injuring them. This power is best remembered for a panel that shows Superman holding a jar of beans and guessing how many beans are in the jar by weighing them and calculating the number based on weight. Although in this panel he actually gets the math wrong by saying that 20 times 16 times 10 is 32,000. It's actually 3,200. I figured that out using regular math. Super mathematics made a more recent appearance in Superman Earth 1 Issue 1, when Clark Kent visits a research lab and immediately solves a complex equation that has been baffling the scientists. Number 9. Super weaving. Appearing in Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane, number 15, this power was not actually performed by Superman, but by a distant but identical relative of his who escaped from the bottle city of Kandor. Van Zee wanted to marry Lois Lane, but decided to settle for her doppelganger, an heiress named Sylvia. In order to prove his love for her, Van Zee got her several elaborate gifts, including the wedding dress of Helen of Troy. Seeing that it was damaged, Van Zee unraveled the threads and used his super weaving to weave a new, more modern wedding dress. Now, since Superman is also Kryptonian, we can assume that he also has this ability. This could explain how Superman repairs his costume when it becomes damaged, something that comes up more often than you'd think. Of course, one could argue that super weaving is just regular weaving at super speed. Number 8. Shooting a mini Superman out of your hand. When Superman temporarily lost most of his powers while investigating a crashed alien ship in Superman number 125, he gained the strange ability to shoot a miniature version of himself out of his hand. This proxy had all of Superman's classic powers, allowing him to pick up Superman's slack while he remained depowered. This is obviously silly, but undeniably useful. Instead of facing danger head-on, Superman could send this miniature version of himself to do the work for him. It's an efficient delegation. Heck, that would be useful for anyone. Imagine being able to send a mini-me out to pick up your dry cleaning. Proxy Superman only lasted for one story before dying from kryptonite exposure, thus returning Superman to his full power.
At number 7 is Dick Grayson, aka Nightwing. Nightwing is the first sidekick that Batman ever had, which makes him the longest standing disciple of Batman. And considering Batman is arguably one of the kings of non-superpowered heroes, this says a lot. Having grown up by Bruce Wayne's side for all that time, Nightwing has seen tons of combat and has learned a lot about making efficient use of weapon and gadget loadouts in high stakes situations. This training gives him enough skill and confidence to go out into the world under his own moniker of Nightwing and make a major name for himself. Being the current leader of the Teen Titans, Dick Grayson already has tons of experience for such a young hero and stands out among other heroes that also have the advantage of actual powers under their belts. At number 6, we have Green Arrow. Now, this was a toss-up between Green Arrow and Hawkeye, but I only had room for one bow and arrow guy on this list. Now, for someone who doesn't actually have any powers and just relies on his skill set as an archer, Green Arrow is extremely impressive. It seems as well that he doesn't even need to equip himself with much defensive gear because his offensive skill is so OP that he can just overwhelm his opponents before they can get a hit in. I mean, he can shoot 33 arrows a minute. That's basically like shooting an extremely high caliber machine gun with perfect accuracy. And he also has a huge array of trick arrows that he can switch out without hesitating, like his exploding tip arrows, which pack a huge punch to his attack strength. And if his enemies can somehow protect themselves from that, he also has a great stealth stat, which allows him to slip away into the shadows to reassess his next approach. He's just one of the more impressive heroes without powers out there, and I wanted to make sure he got his due credit. At number 5, we have Daredevil. Daredevil Daredevil gets a spot higher up on the list because on top of not having any powers, he's famously as blind as a bat. Now you may be eager to contest this one because it's been said that Daredevil does have heightened senses due to his run-in with toxic waste, but it's never been confirmed that his senses are heightened because of the chemicals or simply as a natural response to his loss of eyesight. But either way, he can't see, for crying out loud, so if you wanted to argue that being able to hear and feel things really accurately is considered an advantage when you can't even see, then you can go ahead, but I don't know if I'd agree with you. The truth is, what would normally be seen as a shortcoming by anyone else actually becomes one of the hero's primary motivators to try that much harder at what he does. And not to mention, he's first introduced as a skilled lawyer defending the likes of Namor with his quick wit and cunning. And those abilities always count to some degree as well on a list ranked by power. At number 4 we have CYBORG. Sometimes heroes are endowed with supercharged upgrades which are basically synonymous with actual powers. One example of that is with CYBORG, who after losing some of his body parts is given massive bionic upgrades. There are a multitude of different offensive and defensive features to his robotic suit, or whatever you'd call it. Is it a suit? Because it makes up part of his face. Either way, even just his laser cannon is enough to have him fit in with the other heroes, but ever since he's been outfitted with the boom tube, he's only climbed higher in the ranks. Not to mention his white noise cannon and the mother box more recently. The boom tube, first of all, adds teleportation to his arsenal, the white noise cannon can rip enemies apart instantly, and the mother box gives him access to the multiverse, which brings CYBORG to a whole other level. And considering he's only human somewhere beneath all that tech and armor, it just makes him that much more impressive.
Number 2, shapeshifting. If you still think Clark Kent using glasses to preserve his secret identity is dumb, you're gonna lose it when you find out that he used to have the ability to shapeshift and could have just been doing that instead. Instead of using it to preserve his secret identity, Superman would use this power to impersonate other people, such as in Action Comics number 55, when Superman comes across two men about to wrestle to determine which of them will get to marry a woman named Maisie Day. When Superman finds out that one of the men has been drugged in an attempt to fix the fight, he knocks out the fighter, steals his clothes, changes his face, and wins the fight on his behalf. In an even more extreme example of this power, Superman once used this ability to impersonate an alien, showing that he is not limited to imitating humanoid features. While this is obviously useful, I feel like I have to mention again that it would be even more useful if he used it to create a better disguise for himself than the glasses. Number 1. Mind control and telepathy. In the same issue where Superman impersonated an alien from another dimension, he also displayed the ability to use telepathic will control to convince an alien to remove their interdimensional travel machine. This begs the question as to why Superman doesn't just say, use this power to make Lex Luthor decide not to be a criminal. Although there haven't been other instances of Superman using full-on mind control, his other telepathic powers have shown up here and there in older Superman comics. But their most surprising use, in my opinion, is to essentially function as caller ID, as demonstrated when Superman stared at a ringing phone and was immediately able to tell that it was Perry White calling. This isn't a problem now, but in a time before caller ID, the ability to screen your calls would be surprisingly useful for anyone, let alone the Man of Steel.